Up. Come on, YouTube. Wake up. Wake up. There it goes. Yeah. All right. We are cooking. We are cooking. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron. It is Thursday, April 16th, in this quarantined year of our Lord 2020. These days, I really have to look. I have to look at the thing on my computer to know what day it is and to know like what's going on because the days kind of blend in. Good afternoon, good evening, good day, good morrow, whatever it is happening where you're at. Hope it's good. Hope it's well. I hope you are staying safe. I hope you are staying healthy. I hope you are staying home. I hope you are staying out of trouble. I hope you are maybe practicing that instrument that you've been putting off for a long time. Maybe you got a little more time now. You're like going to practice that instrument. Or maybe you're working all the time. Whatever it may be, I hope you're well. I hope you're safe. You get the idea. You know. I hope you all got your $1,200. I don't know what you're going to do with it. I'm buying a yacht. I told you that. According to Steve Mnuchin, we can live on that $1,200 for 10 weeks. So have fun for the next 10 weeks. I didn't know most people in the country were spending $300 or less a month in rent. I didn't know that. $1,200 for 10 weeks. He should do that. He should demonstrate. He should show us how it's done. Be like, all right, Steve Mnuchin, you go ahead. You live on $1,200 for 10 weeks. Should be fine for 10 weeks. Here's $1,200. Rent's like what? What do regular people pay in rent? Like $200-$300? That gives them some stuff for food, and then whatever else they need. Amazing. A couple quick announcements. So Shahid Butar is going to be joining us on the show at 11:30 a.m., 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. So Shahid's going to be coming on the show here in a little bit. And also, so I'll do Song of the Day first, since we're going to have Shahid for the second half of the show. And then we have some breaking news regarding Flint and what really went down in Flint. Due to an investigation done by the media outlet Status Quo, which is Jordan Chariton and Jen, they did an investigation regarding Flint, and it dropped today. And we're going to be diving into it here in just a minute. But Song of the Day, Here in Your Bedroom by Goldfinger. It's an old ska punk song that was really popular on the radio in the mid to late 90s. You've heard it before. Why is it the Song of the Day? Well, because it's been in my head a lot. And it's been in my head a lot because they re-recorded it for the quarantine. Goldfinger, they did. Now, it sounds a lot like the studio version, but the singer just sang it again. So I'm not sure if they just kind of took all the studio instrumental tracks and he just sang over it, to make it a little different. But either way, it was really fun. And they did like a quarantine video where you see all the members of the band and they're all playing in their quarantined spaces, like their homes and stuff, but they're playing and singing the song. So check that out. Revisit the original, Here in Your Bedroom by Goldfinger. It's a great song. And, when you're going through such a weird time like now, sometimes you want to get nostalgic for simpler times. And that song takes me back to simpler times. It was the mid to late 90s. I was very young. So I didn't have many cares in the world. My only cares in the world was, am I going to be able to land that ollie? Does my band not suck as much? Can I afford to go record shopping soon? Does the girl like me? That was it. I wasn't paying attention to politics. I didn't really have any real responsibilities. It was a fun time. It was a carefree time. And that was a fun song. Fun, third wave ska. Goldfinger also had a little bit of pop and rock going on, and they're from here in Los Angeles. So Here in Your Bedroom by Goldfinger is the song of the day. Oh, and by the way, so I tweeted out yesterday. I just tweeted out, hey, I'm looking for some music. What do you recommend to me? And I got to say, I was blown away by how cool all you guys were on Twitter. I got so many great song recommendations, so many great artists, a lot of stuff I've never even heard of that I can't wait to discover. And some of you guys recommended revisiting some classics that were great recommendations, and I'm going to take you up on them. So I'm going to be going through that Twitter thread. I'm going to be mining it, if you will, for future songs of the day. So look forward to that. So if you responded to that Twitter thread, please do tune in, because I'm going to be going through them one at a time. And I don't know. I mean, I think there were like over 400, 500 responses, something like that. I don't know if I'll get through all of them, but I will be going through as many of them as I can to get songs of the day. I'll be discovering some of these artists, and I'll be listening to it, and I'll be talking about it. And that's going to be fun. I'm really excited about this. And some of you guys also in that same Twitter thread were like, Ron, are you going to do a Spotify playlist of all the songs of the day? Now, okay, boomer moment for me. I had Spotify a long time ago. Like when it first came out, I didn't like it. I don't know why. I didn't like Spotify. I couldn't get into it. I preferred Pandora. And so I deleted the app, and I was like, I don't like this. I don't think it's going to last anyway. I was wrong, obviously. And then I never thought about Spotify again. I never got into it. I was always a Pandora guy, or I would just look something up on YouTube, whatever it may be, and never thought about Spotify again. Finally got back into Spotify because I wanted to make these playlists, and because a lot of people in that Twitter thread were sending me Spotify playlists. And I'm like, you know what? It's time for me to give Spotify another shot and get hip to Spotify. So I made a brand new account, and I am on Spotify now. I still do not know exactly how Spotify works. I know that's bad. I know that's kind of embarrassing. Like, Ron, you're a really big music fan. You don't. No, I didn't like it. And then I was just like, done. One and done. Don't like Spotify. Done with it. It's not going to last. That's what I said. I honestly thought that. And this was however many years ago, because it was when Spotify first came out. And boy, was I wrong. So I'm giving it another shot. And my wife is going to teach me how to use it. So that playlist is coming. And I'm going to be going through the Twitter thread to do more songs of the day. But the songs of the day playlist is coming. All right. Music news over. Now going over to Flint, Michigan, which, by the way, a lot of great music came out of that area. You guys know it. All right. So here's what's going on. Michigan's ex-governor Rick Snyder knew about Flint's toxic water and lied about it. This is an investigation published by Vice, uncovered by Jordan Cheriton and Jen Dyes. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her last name right, over at Status Quo. During the inauguration of his successor, outgoing Michigan Governor Rick Snyder needed a favor. At the January 2019 event, Snyder approached Karen Weaver, who was then the mayor of Flint, a city of nearly 100,000 people that was still reeling from financial decay and a toxic water crisis. He asked whether she could meet with Congressman Elijah Cummings. You have a lot of influence with him. Throughout the water crisis, Cummings led the charge as Congress demanded Snyder and his administration provide more information about what he knew about the poisonous water that ravaged the impoverished majority-minority Rust Belt city after it switched water sources to the corrosive Flint River in 2014. Keep in mind what happened. They privatized their water source, and then all this happened. They privatized their water source to save a little bit of money, and then they had a water crisis. More specifically, Cummings pushed for more information on when Snyder first learned of the lethal bacteria outbreak in Flint. Snyder testified to Congress that he first became aware in January 2016 and held a press conference the next day. Flint residents didn't believe the governor. Their doubt intensified after Harvey Hollins, the director of the state's Urban and Metropolitan Initiatives Office, contradicted the governor, testifying to Congress that he informed Snyder about the outbreak in December of 2015. Back at the inauguration, Weaver said, Snyder asked her to get Cummings to back off from investigating him, emphasizing he wanted to move on with his life as a private citizen. What Snyder didn't know was that Cummings and Weaver had already spoken after Democrats won control of the House in the 2018 midterm election. Weaver said Cummings disclosed his plan to compel Snyder back to Congress for additional questioning. He wanted her there, but Cummings' death in October 2019 prevented that from occurring. After a Vice investigation spanning a year and a half across the state of Michigan, overwhelming evidence indicates Snyder had good reason to worry. So check this out. This is my first time reading this, by the way. Hundreds of confidential pages of documents obtained by Vice, along with emails and interviews, reveal a coordinated 5-year cover-up overseen by Snyder and his top officials to prevent news of Flint's deadly water from going public. All told, the waterborne bacterial disease may have killed at least 115 people in 2014 and 2015, and potentially more whose pneumonia wasn't officially considered the disease, the Legionnaire's disease, as what you get from the contaminated water. In addition to the outbreak, Flint's water supply was contaminated with lead and other heavy metals. Not the good music kind, but heavy metals that shouldn't be in your water. Harmful bacteria, carcinogens, and other toxic components. This wreaked havoc on Flint residents, leaving them with a laundry list of illnesses. Wow. So he knew about this in 2014. So here's what's going on. Snyder was warned about the dangers of using the Flint River as a water source a year before the water switch even occurred. So a year before he even switched it over, he was warned that this ain't going to go well. Snyder had knowledge of the outbreak in Flint as early as October 2014. So he didn't know about it in 2016. He knew about it in 2014. This was 6 months after the water switch and 16 months earlier than he claimed to have learned of the deadly outbreak in testimony under oath before Congress. So he was warned about it a year before they even did it. So he was warned about it, it looks like as far back as 2013. He knew about it in 2014. He's claiming to have no knowledge of this until 2016. Communication among Snyder, his top officials in the state health department, spiked in October 2014. Around the same time, state and environmental and health officials traded emails and calls about the Legionella outbreak in Flint. So he knew about it for years before he claimed he knew about it. And he was warned about it before the switch even happened. So he could have just potentially not done the switch. He could have just been like, okay, this is dangerous. I'm not going to switch. I'm not going to privatize the water supply to save money because it could lead to toxic water. He was warned about it, but it went through anyway. According to sources familiar with the criminal investigation, as well as Flint residents Vice spoke to during these 16 months, Snyder's top advisor, Bard, attempted to pay off sick Flint residents to keep quiet and silence a whistleblower sounding alarms over the city using the Flint River while there was still time to save lives. And Snyder himself punished Weaver, Flint's mayor, she said, after she repeatedly refused his administration's request for her to declare the water safe in Flint to residents. Wow. So in short, I mean, the biggest takeaway here, all of this could have been prevented. All of it. All of what happened in Flint could have been prevented, and they knew about it, and they didn't do anything. They let it go through. Why? Because it padded their pockets. Do you think MSNBC is going to cover this? Think CNN's going to cover this? Do you think Fox News is going to? I guess we'll see. It dropped today. And you know what? I'm glad Vice published it. Got to tip the hat to them for publishing this. But we'll see if any of the corporate cable outlets even mention this. Because they've been silent on Flint since, well, for years now. Flint still doesn't have clean water. Michelle Wolf said it when she did the correspondence dinner. It's how she closed. That was her last, you know what? You guys really suck to the media. She reminded them, by the way, Flint doesn't have clean water. Well, you guys are putting on your tinfoil hats about Russiagate 24 hours a frickin' day. And then when you're talking about Trump's tweets, when you're lying about how much Medicare for all costs, when you're having just this knee-jerk, hyper-partisan horse and pony show and passing it off as news, when you're lying about all of our foreign interventions, Flint still doesn't have clean water. You're not talking about it. In fact, the only time you report on DAPL is to try to make it out like the protesters were in the wrong. And you're all, and you know, you're trying to, and when you try to make claims that Russia infiltrated DAPL. So, wow. So there you have it. They knew. They knew years before they claimed they knew. And fortunately today, guys, we actually have some good news when it comes to water protection. Of course, that's some bad news out of Flint. But here is actually some good news. We have been following this since it happened, or well, since it's been going on. This has kind of been in the sphere for a little bit. Here's a follow up that is new as of today. This is from a little earlier today, as of the recording of this. Judge cancels the Keystone XL pipeline permit. It's been canceled, y'all. Awesome. A district judge in Montana reportedly ruled Wednesday against the Keystone XL pipeline, canceling a key permit necessary for the project's construction. According to the AP, Judge Brian Morris ruled in favor of the environmental groups who argued that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers plan to construct the pipeline over rivers and not properly take endangered species into consideration. I don't know what all endangered species they're referring to, but I have a feeling humanity is among those endangered species. The setback for TC Energy, the pipeline sponsor, comes just days after construction on the pipeline began near the U.S.-Canada border, the AP noted. Environmental groups celebrated Wednesday's court victory, with the main group behind the lawsuit calling it a significant hurdle the pipeline would face. All right, so it creates another significant hurdle for the project. Anthony Swift of the National Resources Defense Council told the AP, regardless of whether they have the cross-border segment, Keystone XL has basically lost all of its Clean Water Act permits for water crossings. Other lawsuits are set to go to court Thursday against the pipeline, according to the news service, including efforts by Native American tribes to halt the pipeline project, which they argue poses significant environmental risk to reservations. Protests against the project came to a head in 2016-2017 when demonstrators gathered at Standing Rock. So basically, they went to court saying that they need to be more involved in the process. That's what the Sioux tribe did. They went to court saying they need to be more involved in the process. And the judge heard that out. We covered that on the show when that happened. The judge heard that out. They're like, yes, they need to be more involved in the process. And we're going to kind of put a hold on things until the process is more inclusive, was basically what they ruled. Well, now they're canceling the permit altogether. So that was a victory that happened for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. That was a big victory. And now this is an even bigger one because they just canceled the permit altogether. First, it was like, yeah, you're not including the natives in this, and you need to do that. This is their land. It's not right. We're going to halt things until you do proper research, until you do proper investigations, until you include them at the table, to make sure this is done, quote unquote, safely. Because guess what? It can't be done safely. This pipeline, which is already leaked at various times, goes across aquifers that account for about 20% of the nation's water supply. And whenever we do this stuff, none of the proper scientific homework is done. They found that out about fracking. None of the homework was done first. Drill first, ask never. That's the policy of the oil and gas companies. Drill first, ask never. Because they don't care. Because they just care about the bottom line. They don't care about the environment. They don't care about wreaking havoc on the environment. That's just the cost of doing business to them. And if you don't have access to clean water, they don't care. They don't care. Doesn't affect their bottom line. And by the way, that energy, the quote energy, is not even staying domestic. It's being shipped all over the country. So every fracking project, all over the world, excuse me, not all over the country, misspeak. So every fracking project, every pipeline project, every drilling project, whenever someone tells you, oh, well, we need it for our energy, we don't. First of all, it's just beating a corpse to death in regards to our dependency on fossil fuels. It's time to completely get off of fossil fuels. We need to get off of them, or we're not going to be on this planet much longer. We got 9 years to drastically change the way we do business, to drastically change our energy policies, or else we're going to hit a point of no return. And humanity's days are numbered. We got 9 years to turn it around. So we need to get off fossil fuels completely. All the incentives should be going towards green energy, to be making sure that everyone can have an electric car, to extensive rail, to getting less cars on the road, to getting fossil fuel powered cars out of the equation completely. Not for drilling more. That's not, quote, solving our energy needs at all. So this is good. This is a huge victory. The energy companies are going to strike back. They're definitely going to strike back. But for now, we got a victory today. For now, the judge has canceled. The judge. I've anointed them the judge, but they're really just judge. Judges canceled the Keystone XL pipeline permit. So definitely a victory, but it ain't over. It ain't over. The energy companies are going to strike back. Not trying to be a Debbie Downer about it, but the energy companies are going to strike back. So, but for now, definitely got a victory. And stand in solidarity with the Sioux tribe, with Standing Rock, with the DAPL protesters. Got a victory today. All right. So, guys, I know that we were talking about the $1,200 the stimulus, which again, you're good for 12 weeks, or 12 weeks. That's what Steve Mnuchin said. So he thinks people can live on $100 a week. You can live on $100 a week, right? That's a living wage, according to Steve Mnuchin. Isn't that brilliant? But check this out. Here is an investigation done by Dave Dahan. Let's close out of this. Your coronavirus check is coming, but your bank can grab it. Regulators have given banks the green light to use stimulus funds to pay off debts that individuals owe them. What else have they given banks the green light to do? Well, they've given the banks trillions, and the banks have the green light to do whatever they want with it. We're supposed to have all these programs like the PPP program where individuals and small businesses can apply for loans where up to $10,000 can be forgiven. But the bank said, screw it. We don't want to deal with this. We're not equipped to deal with this. We don't have enough manpower to deal with this. So tough apples. And they just closed up, and there's nothing anyone can do. They were handed trillions, and they're like, the government was basically, hey, here's trillions, banks, distributed amidst the people. And the bank said, okay, we'll do it. Oops, fingers crossed, we ain't doing nothing. And what are you going to do about it? And the government said, we're going to go on vacation. That's what happened. No embellishment. That's what happened in the United States. The government said, here's a bunch of money, banks. Do what you want with it. We're going on vacation. And the bank said, thanks. That's awesome. We're going to put it in our pockets. That's what happened. You know what's going on in other countries? They have UBIs that people are able to get. They have UBIs that people are able to apply for and get. They have wage. They're covering people's wages. They're covering most of people's. In England right now, most wages are covered for people. And what they have instead is that they have people going around making sure that the most susceptible among them, the elderly and so forth, and immune-compromised people, are getting food delivered to them. I talked to a friend of mine who lives in England, and he's like, yeah, things are kind of crazy here. It's not great, but compared to you guys, we're doing amazing. We're doing absolutely amazing compared to you guys. The rest of Europe, a lot of the rest of Europe, this is what he's saying. The rest of Europe is doing better than us. But compared to the United States, we're great right now. He's like, most of our wages are covered. And I'm volunteering delivering food to the elderly right now. That's what I'm doing because my wages are covered. In Canada, they have a UBI program, which I know is not perfect. I know it has its flaws. And it's not technically given to every single person. It's not perfect. But, you see all these things on Twitter where it's like, yeah, I lost my job and I applied for it. And a couple days later, my $2,000 a month, my first payment was in my bank account. You see that happening in Canada. So I'm not saying anyone has a perfect system, but compared to the United States, then what did the United States do? Why is our response similar to third world countries? It's not because we don't have the wealth or the resources. The United States is the richest country in the world. It's because, once again, all that wealth is given to the 1%. We decided we're just going to give a bunch of money to the banks, hope they do the right thing with it. Wow. Once again, Wall Street gets bailed out while Main Street is left to fend for itself. The same thing Obama did, and Trump's doing the same thing. It's not like the United States isn't a country. We are a corporation with state lines. We might as well just call it the United States, the United Corporation of America at this point. That's what this is. This is a corporation with state lines. Mitt Romney will tell you corporations are people anyway. And now you get this coronavirus check. Trump insisted on having his name on it, by the way, which, I'm all for that. He's never attached his name to anything and it's plummeted before. How could that go wrong? Your coronavirus check is coming and your bank can grab it. So this week, the $1,200 CARES Act payment, the $1,200 that'll set you for 12 weeks, Congress approved in response to the coronavirus crisis, will begin to appear in Americans' bank accounts. They already have. Funds will be wired to eligible recipients who previously authorized the IRS to post their refunds through direct deposit. But the money may not make it into the hands of those who need it to pay bills, buy food, or just survive amid mass unemployment and widespread suffering. Individuals might first have to fend off their own bank, which has just been given the power to seize the $1,200 payment and use it to pay off outstanding debt. Banks would be first in line to grab the payments to offset a delinquent loan or past due fees. Even if the individual thinks their account with that bank is closed, if the payments post there, the bank could conceivably use them to cover up old debts. Wow. The Treasury Department effectively blessed this activity on a webinar with banking officials last week. An audio obtained by the prospect, Rhonda Kent, a chief disbursing officer with Treasury's Bureau of the Fiscal Service, can be heard explaining that the banks had posed questions to her about whether these payments could be subject to collection from the bank to which the money is deposited if the payee owes an outstanding loan or other payments to the bank. She responded twice that there's nothing in the law that precludes that action, while counseling that the bank's compliance officers should consult with their legal offices about what policies their banks will implement. Wow. So, and keep in mind, this stimulus payment, this quote stimulus payment, is not really emergency funds necessarily. It's just basically a loan, so to speak, on your future taxes. You're going to have to pay all that back. It's going to be taken out of future taxes. So they're basically just paying you your future money. That's all they're doing. They're just giving you your future money. And not only that, but your bank can just decide to take it. And there's nothing you can do about it. Absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, what did we do initially? Well, everybody in government decided, hey, banks, here's trillions of dollars. Do the right thing. We're going on vacation. What a great system we have. What a great system. So, folks, Shahid Butar has just arrived in the green room. We're going to go ahead and bring him in. Let me just go ahead and add him here. Shahid, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Ron, especially under the circumstances. How about you? How are you holding up?
I'm doing good, man. Good to see you. So for anyone who is not familiar with Shahid, he is running in California's 12th district against the one and only the queen of refrigerators, Nancy Pelosi. And he's also a digital rights activist. He has a very extensive resume in that field, and that's what we're going to be talking with him about today. And but first of all, let's check in a little bit just about how you're doing. How's everything going with the campaign? How's everything going on your end?
Better than, frankly, I would expect. Yeah, I had a chance to speak with the Commonwealth Club. It's an organization here in San Francisco that hosts large events. It was virtual on account of the pandemic and the shelter-in-place order, but that was a great opportunity. Just last week, we launched our own live stream inspired by people, including yourself, in the last few
weeks.
Weeks.
Man.
Had a chance to talk with Linda Sarsour yesterday and Medea Benjamin last week, so that's been an opportunity just to stay connected with folks. The first month, actually, after the shelter-in-place order, the campaign really made a pivot, not unlike the way that Bernie and many other campaigns on the left, where we basically suspended voter outreach and just focused on mutual aid. And we were not really set up as a campaign to deliver services, but we are set up to deliver information. So we spent a few weeks just calling first, our few thousand volunteers here in the Bay Area, and then voters generally, just to make sure that everybody knew where they could find a free meal and which organizations were hosting pop-up food pantries that they could visit, how they could qualify for different benefits, what the process was to delay rent payments, for instance, that might be challenging. So that was our last few weeks, and we're just pivoting now back to voter outreach. And in fact, kind of as we speak, we're beta testing now and just launching distributed phone banking. And I do think this is a really exciting moment for our campaign, because this will be the first point at which anybody anywhere, like we have been for Bernie, can sign up to then jump into the process to call San Francisco voters on our behalf. And when I think about, Bernie's campaign, many of us were putting in those calls we might have had weeks usually to flip entire states. We have over 6 months, and our race is just a single city. So it's imminently within reach, given the size of the movement that we're helping represent. And I'm excited to liberate this seat.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that, man. And I'll have to check out some of the live stream. You know, the only time your opponent has probably been around Medea Benjamin is if Medea Benjamin was being removed for protesting somewhere. That's likely the only time Nancy Pelosi would ever be cognizant of an activist like Medea Benjamin.
I'm sure that's absolutely true. Or it's an activist like Medea Benjamin perhaps was trolling Pelosi for her ice cream stash. But that's the other thing. You asked how things are going. And, you know, it amazes me that so often Speaker Pelosi creates opportunities for us. You know, she creates opportunities for us every time she supports Trump, every time she supports his trade policy or his foreign policy, every time that she said she wouldn't impeach him, and then every time she showed up and refused to impeach him for all of his crimes. I have said in the press that I feel like she's campaigning on my behalf, and going on television to show off her stash of $250 worth of ice cream in her $22,000 refrigerator, I think was, I mean, for me watching it, I was just like, you got to be kidding me, seriously? And, you know, I posted a shot of my freezer.
I saw that. Yeah. Well, wasn't it like the ice cream she posted too? Like, isn't it like someone posted like it goes for almost $12 a pint or something like that? It's very fancy ice cream.
$25 a pint when you factor in the delivery cost. So every one of those pints in her fridge was worth more or less everything in mine. And I think about what people are struggling with at the moment. You know, there's so many people who don't know how to pay rent. There's so many people who are sick right now and can't get to a doctor because they can't pay for medicine. And they're looking at their elected leaders standing in front of industrial restaurant quality kitchen appliances filled to the brim with high-end gourmet foods that many of us can't afford. And like, if that's who's representing us, it's no surprise to me, frankly, that we're all getting fleeced by banks and that we have been for 30 years. I mean, that's
exactly. You make the connections where it's like, oh, this is really the haves versus the have-nots. They're just flaunting it in our face. They just gave the banks trillions while telling the rest of us to pound sand. Then they went on vacation, and now they're showing off their refrigerators with their ridiculous. I didn't even know ice cream that expensive was even made. And here's the deal. I've actually had some exposure. I was at this party, and it was a vegan themed party. And, you know, the person who was hosting the party has means, you know, they're a successful musician who has done very well for themselves. And so it was sponsored by a couple organizations. One of the organizations was a vegan ice cream company. I forget the name off the top of my head. It was some of the best ice cream I've ever had, though. And it's an avocado-based vegan ice cream.
Okay.
Dude, it went for like, I think it was maybe 10. Like, it wasn't even close to that. It was expensive ice cream. And I ate it, and I was like, okay, if I buy this ever, it's a special treat. This is very expensive vegan ice cream because it's amazing. It's some of the best ice cream I've ever tasted. And I'm like, this is going to be a special treat if I ever get it, you know, but even that was like significantly less than $25 a pint.
Yeah.
I don't know.
An ice cream to make it worth $25 a pint, you know, I mean, that's a question in itself. And at the end of the day, I mean, I'm not trying to, you know, beat up on an ice cream company or people who like ice cream. You know, it's not about that. It's just the fact that I think you nailed it. It's the legitimate outrage towards people who they are public servants who are ultimately oligarchs, right? I mean, these are people who are not subject to the same pressures and challenges that the rest of us are. I'm a renter in the country's most brutal rental market. She's a landlord who makes $1 million a year off rent payments alone, let alone capital gains in her congressional salary and, you know, all the other money that she and her husband make. I mean, we describe in foreign contexts leaders as oligarchs when they combine political power and economic might. And we are hesitant to use the term here, but the shoe absolutely fits. And I am running against an oligarch of our supposed republic. And I'm doing that as an exercise in attempting to vindicate and reclaim our democracy. And I see, another thing I'll just say here, when you asked how the campaign's going, I feel incredibly grateful for the thousands now of people who have flocked to our campaign in the last week alone since Bernie Sanders suspended his. And I'm very humbled by the opportunity to represent a movement at the same time that I'm seeking the opportunity to represent a city formally in Congress. And, we now have well over 15,000 donors that are supporting our campaign, which is absurd to me. And so far beyond anything I could contemplate at the outset when we launched this campaign in 2018. And given all the support that we're getting from every corner of the country and every part of the city, I have a great deal of confidence that, presuming the election happens and that we can keep the post office open and the infrastructure is reliable and secure, I have a great deal of confidence that we'll win this election in November.
I hope so, man. You know, I'm pulling for you. But there might be something, though, with oligarchs who really like ice cream. Because you know who else loves ice cream? Joe Biden.
Okay.
So I actually think, regular folks like an ice cream. That's great. But oligarchs like an ice cream. There's got to be, I mean, there is no good oligarch, though. So I guess it's like, some of them like ice cream. Some of them don't. Doesn't really make a difference.
Someone should do a study on who likes what flavors. I wonder if oligarchs have a particular flavor that they prefer. That might be an interesting.
Probably Tears of the Poor. That's probably a mutually favorite flavor, if I had to take a guess. So let's talk digital rights, man. You are very good on this issue. And, I know I personally, you brought up Bernie suspending his campaign, which of course has been pretty tough for all of us. But, I think a lot of people, myself being one of them, when that happened, we're like, okay, where am I going to go now? Where am I going to go to now? Because I got to go somewhere. And, for some people, I know for me, it's like, okay, I'm really going to focus on causes. I'm going to focus on net neutrality. I'm going to focus on municipal broadband. I'm going to focus on cause-based initiatives. I'm going to focus on, advocacy groups that are doing worthwhile work, like Fight for the Future and organizations like that.
Right.
And then other people were like, well, I'm going to go to another grassroots campaign, and they find their way to you, or they find their way to, Amanda Sibby or Lauren Ashcraft or Rebecca Parsons, or, the list goes on and on. I'm not trying to leave anybody off, but, there's a lot of lists of progressives trying to make something happen. But so as far as digital rights is concerned, what are some of the things we should be particularly concerned about right now?
One of the ones at the moment that's in sharp focus in Congress, though you wouldn't know it since the body is not convening, is the recent expiration of several provisions of the Patriot Act, which have finally expired, as they have been scheduled to do so on no fewer than half a dozen prior occasions. And on every one of those occasions, most recently December of last year, Nancy Pelosi teamed with authoritarian Republicans to extend those measures. And, I'm not going to thank the pandemic for anything, but one of the things it did is basically force off the congressional table, off the agenda, the space to consider extending these laws any further. And just to be clear, these are not security measures. These are surveillance measures that are ultimately security theater measures. They have been found by independent reviewers in the government to have never prevented any attacks. What they do, however, is compromise both the privacy and the security, and more importantly, frankly, the dissent of people subject to those provisions. And because those provisions have been used in secret without notice to the targets, it's basically created this specter of ambient monitoring. And that's especially pernicious to dissent. And my concern is not privacy in the surveillance arena. My concern is democracy. It's, yes, surveillance offends privacy, but because it inhibits speech, it's democracy that it ultimately threatens. And that's what concerns me. I'm an immigrant to this country. I don't take our democracy for granted. I care about it very deeply. And I have since my earliest memories, the tired, huddled poor masses yearning to breathe free. That is me. That is my family. I understand that. And one of the reasons I'm running for office is because I see the promise and the vision in that commitment compromised. It's not threatened at this point. We have lost it. We have abandoned any pretense to the vision that brought my family halfway around the world to be here. The promise of liberty and opportunity, of justice and fairness, of legitimacy in government. And whether it's, the plutocracy that is infected, money and politics, for instance, or whether it's in the digital rights arena, this hammer fist, or the potential, maybe I should make that point clear too. A lot of people might not connect mass surveillance to authoritarianism because mass surveillance has been in place now for 15 years. And some people would say we don't live in an authoritarian society. First of all, I would just say that to Eric Garner first. And that's an interesting lens through which to reflect, because to some people, fascism is a future fear. And for many Americans, particularly those with dark skin, fascism has been here for many years. It's not a recent phenomenon to people who have been subject to arbitrary state violence, xenophobia, and militarism. These are among the issues that Dr. King raised, for instance, in his era. In the digital rights arena, you're setting aside surveillance, other things that are happening and this isn't so digital rights, but I want to connect it because it's the next phase beyond surveillance is detention. So the pandemic is forcing a lot of discussion about public health motivated surveillance measures. And I understand the need for some of those subject to very tight limits. And I'd love to get into that in just a second. But there's another specter, another landscape of contended powers. And this is really disturbing to me because it indicates not just a failure of our civic institutions, but the press as well. And, you know, I'm grateful for you offering a space for this. The only outlets to this point that have covered the Trump administration's attempt to suspend habeas corpus are Newsweek and Politico. And they've each written one story in the last month and nothing since. And there is a completely, as far as I can tell, secret process happening in Washington where the Trump administration is seeking the power to allow chief justices to disregard core constitutional protections to prevent people from being detained arbitrarily. And it's one thing to say that we need to have maybe surveillance measures or maybe even conceivably, you know, more coercive measures responding to a pandemic. But the point there is if we're going to do anything like that, we have to have trust in the process. There has to be transparency. There has to be accountability. There's been none of that at any point in the last 100 years that we have been practicing domestic surveillance in the United States. It has always been politicized. It has always been abused. And there's no reason for us to trust, especially in the face of a pandemic, the extension or the expansion of these very dangerous powers, particularly considering who's in the White House.
Yeah, and I think you bring up an important point here, because a lot of times when you bring up these issues, sometimes people's knee-jerk reaction is to be like, wait, we're in a pandemic and you're not taking the pandemic seriously. It's like, whoa, back up. I take the pandemic very seriously. But there's a possibility for two truths to be a truth. One truth: this is a very serious pandemic that we need to take extremely seriously. We need to quarantine. We need to take all these measures completely seriously and need to do as much as we can to level this thing off. But a second truth: there are some unnecessary overreaches by the government, and they're weaponizing a bad situation for their advantage. Those can both be true at the same time. And we're seeing it play out. And yeah, you're saying like, yeah, there is a time and a place where perhaps some surveillance can be helpful. Like if there was for instance, where say somebody gets it and, you know, maybe they weren't really quarantining, maybe they weren't really doing what they were supposed to. And they're just like, oh, geez, I don't even know where I was the past few weeks. I might have been around a susceptible person. I'm not sure. So then them in cooperation with other entities can say, okay, well, we can take a look at your phone records. We can kind of ping where you were and when, and then you can reach out to anyone who might have been compromised. That's one thing. That's productive and transparent and fair and doesn't infringe on anyone's civil liberties because you're working in conjunction with these other entities. That is light years different than just saying like, well, we're going to let Google find out where you're going all the time.
You nailed it.
Those are two completely different things.
And to press on that, you know, this program by Apple and Google, I can understand, to your point, you know, some people might welcome this and say this is a thoughtful response to a public health crisis. And it can be, it might be. I'm not going to throw it under the bus at the outset. But the point here is that if we're flirting with these kinds of powers, we have to have meaningful oversight. And it's precisely what has been entirely absent in the entire arena surrounding digital rights. I mean, remember in the last year, that several times that Mark Zuckerberg has gone to Capitol Hill to testify before Congress, and just the absolutely inane, imbecilic questions he's been asked by ignorant members of Congress who don't even understand the first thing about the landscape that they're being charged with governing. And in this arena, if we're going to allow not just government, but also private sector surveillance measures, and, you know, a contact tracing app, and what makes the Apple and Google innovation so interesting, is that it's cross-platform, and I've long been a favor of cross-platform initiatives to put users before corporate interests, and so that's an interesting thing in the first place too. They're running it at the OS level, not at the application layer, so it doesn't require opt-in, which means that it is less respective of user privacy than an alternative set of, you know, the hypothetical that you sketched out. And I'm not going to say that that's necessarily problematic, but especially if we're disregarding opt-in rights, we need to have robust oversight. Where is this data going? Who collects it? Who retains it? What can they use it for? Who else do they share it with? These are not parameters that should be left defined. It's absolutely critical that in any private or public sector surveillance measure, whether motivated by perceived security needs or public health, that there be parameters defined in advance for how they can be used, who can collect them, under what conditions, how long they can retain them, and who they give them to. Those parameters on collection, dissemination, retention, and use, those are critical ingredients to ensure legitimacy. And they've been entirely absent in all the other contexts that we've adopted surveillance. And so the idea that a pandemic should allow us to be more comfortable with these very same potentially authoritarian measures that have prompted my and many other people's concerns in the past, it's premature unless we actually show up in the way that we've been saying for the last 20 years. I'm not saying that we should conduct no government surveillance. I'm saying that if we conduct any surveillance, it should be subject to meaningful oversight with independent judicial review, with a real warrant requirement, and somebody standing on the other side of it saying, oh, this is just a government witch hunt. Oh, this is a corrupt investigator spying on his ex-wife. Oh, and that happens, incidentally. We know dozens of cases where that's been found to have happened.
Oh yeah, that's what a lot of the police officers were caught using facial recognition for. They were trying to find like information on exes and stuff. It's just, well, so what is a better approach then? As far as like a concrete policy, if you were in office right now, what would be your approach to this?
So with the contact tracing app, I would want to be doing oversight of any companies developing one. And the critical questions I'd be asking that I'd want to see in at least their corporate policies, if not a public policy to restrain what companies could do here. First, a use limit. Any data collected from the mobile devices or the health records of anyone being used in a contact tracing setting should be limited only to contact tracing and sharing information only about potential virus exposure, not, for instance, leaked to credit agencies, not leaked to law enforcement, certainly not leaked to military and intelligence agencies. At the moment, anything that comes in through any of those channels is widely shared across all of them. And so tight limits to prevent that from happening. Data retention controls here would be critical. From what I understand, people are contagious when they have been exposed to the virus, not indefinitely. And so ensuring that people don't appear in the database for years and years at a time that's a retention limit. The dissemination limit we talked about, that's the limiting. It's the information slipping into other hands. And I mentioned credit agencies. I want to just press on that. We already know that surveillance data is used to discriminate, not just by the government, but putting credit agencies in a position to discriminate against people according to information that they didn't ask anyone to collect. And that's again, this sort of example of a dissemination violation with a use creep. And so the use creep in my mind is the biggest issue. And that's exactly why we've been concerned about corporate surveillance. Many companies collect information. Their purpose is to sell you things, but it leaks to the government, and their purpose is to watch what you say. And so the dissemination can expand use because in different entities' hands, information can be used in different ways. And so that's why dissemination and use limits are so critical. The biggest thing here, you asked what I'd want to see in a policy. The biggest part for me that's missing is process, and that is oversight, right? At the moment, we have basically a clown in the White House and no one minding the store. And, whatever random thing pops into his head becomes national policy for a day. And he claims that he has absolute authority, contrary to every iota of our national, tradition and text. I mean, it was really alarming to me to see a president claim entirely falsely, not just authoritarian, but limitless powers. And it's an interesting moment and I would invite any of your listeners. There's one line, and this is a sitting US president who told us in 1961 to take nothing for granted. And the future of our democracy is very much at stake. And I don't want to say again in the abstract future, there is a current, clear and present danger to our Constitution sitting in the White House. And his congressional enablers, the chief among whom I'm challenging in the November election, have done nothing to stop him. And I see in these not just the potential responses to the pandemic, but also the failures to respond to the pandemic, right? Think about the weeks it took for shelter-in-place orders to emerge in many parts of the country. Think about the weeks it took to order personal protective equipment, and then the shady ways that this administration was interfering in international supply chains, pissing off our allies by basically stealing their equipment because we were too short-sighted here to do the right thing and guard public health when we had the chance in advance warning. It is an object, I want to make this clear, it is shameful and unacceptable that the United States is at the top of the global pandemic rankings. We had months to prepare, and more Americans have died already. Many multiples more have died than died in the 9/11 attacks. And we need to internalize this as a moment of profound failure by our political apparatus. Both parties are responsible for this, and leaders in both parties. And there's absolutely no reason that we should concede to defer to the people who delivered us into the gaping maw of this crisis, the continued opportunity or the opportunity to continue undermining the rights and needs of the American people.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, and it goes beyond. Yeah, like you said, like both parties are complicit in this. Both parties are responsible for this. And it goes even past that. And it goes to, well, this is what our system produces too. When you look at our system, we're just not equipped. When you break it down to like the biggest, just nuts and bolts, like explain it in 30 seconds or less, it's basically like, look, we're set up for profit above all else, for the bottom line above all else. We have a handful of companies that control everything. Wall Street oversees everything. They're just pulling the strings. And when you have an entire social system and economy set up that way, you are not going to be equipped to handle anything resembling a pandemic. And your leadership doesn't care because they're still going to be fine.
Yeah, all of their success metrics indicate that things are going great. I mean, with the exception of the stock market, but the point is Nancy Pelosi's fridge is full, right? And so that indicates that the failure is not internalized in the way that we would need it to be in order for our institutions to be responsive. And that is a failure, not just at the policy layer. It's a failure structurally in the capacity of our system politically, in the capacity of our system economically, in the capacity for any particular industrial sector like health insurance to respond to emerging needs. And this is a gaping illustration of the failures of the paradigm that preceded us. Why the US and South Korea got warnings on the same day. Our first confirmed cases were on the same day. Why in South Korea is the curve so flat, whereas here it looks like, a math function, with an infinite asymptote. The difference particularly is that in South Korea, you can get tested and treatment if you're sick, period. It's a no-brainer. We don't even have that still here yet. We have a theoretical commitment to free testing if you can source a kit, and we have a theoretical commitment to free treatment for COVID, but nothing else. But then what do we do the next time there's a pandemic or when the virus mutates? Do we have to pass a new bill to allow people to get free testing for every version of the virus that emerges? I mean, that is absolutely senseless. And just stupid. Why would we do that when we can get in front of the next pandemic, when we frankly could have been in front of this one by simply saying that we have the money, we have the resources, we have the richest civilization in the history of humankind. If someone in America needs to see a doctor, they see the doctor. I read today, I can't remember the publication, it was The Guardian, quoted a doctor who spoke of a patient that they were intubating, whose last words, potentially of their life, were, "Who is going to pay for this?" And the doctor was describing their own heartbreak at their patient at the end of their life, potentially worried more about the cost than their care. What is that about, people? We are better than this.
Well, it's insane. And when you see every single article from like the corporate media, they're always saying how much this, how much the CARES Act is going to cost the federal government. They always be like, and it's going to cost this much and it's going to cost that much. First of all, it's not really costing them anything because they're actually just giving us an advanced loan on our future taxes. That's all they're doing. So it's not really costing them a dime. Second of all, no one asked how much it's going to cost when trillions were given to the banks. So this is just, this is an oligarchy. Like this is a straight up plutocracy. And it's unbelievable. When you see stuff like that, you just look at that and you're just like, this is a capitalism death cult. This isn't a country. Like what the hell are you talking about? How much is it going to cost? People are dying. People can't get food. People can't make rent. And you're worried about the bottom line that it's going to cost the government who's screwing you over every opportunity they get. And why do we see headlines like that? Is it because every journalist in the country is completely brainwashed? Not necessarily. It's because that's the way our media functions, because guess what? They're owned by the same entities that own the politicians, that own the judges, that own the corporations. It's a handful of owners that own everything. The game is rigged, and we need a freaking new game.
The only place I'd push back, I'm with you on all of it. I wouldn't say that there's a handful of owners. I think the owners are more of a class, and it is the 0.1%. Sure. But there's more than a handful of people in that 0.1%. So I locate it less in a tight conspiracy, but I absolutely agree with you that effectively that there has been a class war that we long ago lost, we the American people, to capital. And people oftentimes describe capitalism as if it were consistent with democracy. But no two systems could be more diametrically opposed. Capitalism is predicated on economic inequality, and democracy requires political equality. They run in opposite directions. There's profound tension between the two, and capitalism ate our democracy a long time ago, particularly under the Clinton administration. When you describe capitalism as a death cult, I want to just expand on that. I would describe it as a racist death cult, and I will cite Dr. Martin Luther King for that proposition. He told us this decades ago. And at the time when he described the intersecting evils of militarism, capitalism, and racism, which can be, you can see that illustrated in any number of ways. In his era, take 1953, right? When the US imposes a right-wing dictatorship on Iran after Iran tried to nationalize its oil fields. What was that? Militarism, racism, and capitalism. Capitalism for the oil, racism towards, a country whose democratic rights we were running roughshod over, and militarism is how we effectuated that resource grab. That's been the play we've been running for 70 years. And what did we get for it? A climate catastrophe, right? Even before the pandemic hit, it was clear that capitalism was a death cult because it is marching our species off a cliff. And it is frankly preying on the future by taking resources that don't belong to us, taking resources that do belong to the future, civilizational and objects of inheritance, and plundering them. That's what every drop of oil that we pull out of the ground is. That's what fracking is. It is preying on the future by taking its resources so the people in the present can live more comfortably. And that was bankrupt before. It was bankrupt in King's Day. And at the time, he told us that it was justice everywhere that was threatened. And in the years since, it's come to be life on this planet that is threatened. And the pandemic dials it up even further where, no, it's not about future generations anymore. And I want to be rigorous here. I'm not going to claim that the climate crisis drove the pandemic, but I will claim that corporate resource extraction did. And here's the case for that. We know that habitat encroachment increases contacts between human beings and wild animals. There is a strong theory that the coronavirus was a zoonotic disorder that came from bats through pangolins. Habitat encroachment, corporate resource extraction, drives both climate chaos and potentially pandemics. And the idea that in both of these contexts, we have put corporate profits before the lives, not just of individuals, not just of entire communities, but at this point, tens of thousands of Americans alone. And that number is not coming down, y'all. It is appalling to me. It amazes me that we accept this. I mean, we sing anthems about being in a land of the free and the home of the brave. You might think that we're free if you think about freedom as like the freedom to spend all your money and die homeless because you can't get the care that you need. But you can't claim that we're brave when we're being taken to the cleaners the way that we have been and have been. This is not, and none of this is recent. I've been fighting these fights for 20 years. Bernie Sanders has been doing it for 50. And I watch Americans getting fleeced while talking about being brave and free this whole time. And it's like, what planet are we on, people? And I just want to, again, bring that back to my race. I think, you mentioned before the dynamic in media, and I want to just, raise up an argument that Bernie Sanders has made that corporate media cost us a president who was actually poised to address some of these issues. Another way of putting that is not only is capitalism and democracy unfortunately in tension, but our news media is undermining our democracy.
Oh, big time. They are. I mean, hey, Noam Chomsky said it best. He's like, any authoritarian regime would be envious of the American media. That's a paraphrase of what he actually, but that's essentially the message of what he was saying. And yeah, I mean, the idea that our media structure is inherent to democracy, it is the total opposite of that. In many other countries, our media structure would be illegal. In Norway, our media structure would not be legal. And, I hope someday we see a world where it's not legal here. And stuff like CNN and MSNBC and Fox News can't even exist anymore. And by the way, I am fine referring to it as a racist death cult instead of just a death cult, because that makes it even worse, which I'm all for, because it should sound as bad as possible, because that's what it is. And then you'll see some blue no matter who people who are going, well, I got to pick between the capitalist death cult and the racist capitalist death cult. And right. I'm going to go for the capitalist death cult because that at least they're not tweeting mean things.
Well, the scary thing is that Biden, unfortunately, has the same history of racial predation that Trump has.
I know, right?
Done more to put millions of dark-skinned Americans in prison than Donald Trump has. And that's a very unsettling realization. But many of us who long supported the person better suited to be our next president, Bernie Sanders, we've been making this point. And Biden is nobody's hope for anything. And I don't frankly think there's a snowball's chance in hell he can win this race. He doesn't have support. He needs a teleprompter to finish a sentence. He doesn't have a vision. And he frankly has been preying on so many different sectors of Americans who he's going to need. He's preyed on women. He's preyed on minorities. He put Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. And my favorite is when people talk about, oh yeah, think about the Supreme Court.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Think about the Supreme Court. We got to go for the guy who voted for Scalia.
Right.
We got to go for that guy and the Clarence Thomas thing. And yeah, he has a great history there.
And while we're on the Supreme Court, I'll just throw this out there. I don't get a chance to talk about it a lot, but I have a proposal to end judicial life tenure to recover judicial independence. And the key there is basically making sure that Supreme Court justices don't sit in judgment over the rest of us for their entire lives. There's no good reason for it. That can be overturned through a simple act of Congress, does not take a constitutional amendment. It would have profound consequences for the nomination process. It would depoliticize the court. And it might be one way that we can recover meaningful access to justice, despite, I see Brett Kavanaugh on the court now. I fought the Kavanaugh nomination in 2006 to the DC circuit the first time I worked in Washington. And, I watched the right wing take our courts over. And unfortunately, Joe Biden was part of that as a Democrat. And that's not acceptable. We have to have accountability for those kinds of failures and acts that fueled the right wing, not merely failed to mount resistance. He was actively part of the right wing takeover of the courts. And to me, that is entirely unacceptable.
Amen, man. So where can people go to find out more about you? We're out of time, but where can people go to learn more about Shahid Butar?
Thanks, Ron. Check us out online. We're at shahidforchange.us. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Shahid for Change, and YouTube, I should say.
And it's just for spelled out, right? F-O-R?
Yep. Shahid's SHAHIDFORCHANGE. Always great to be with you. Just one last thing I'll say. You, as doing real journalism, is one reason I'm so appreciative. Our post about me appearing with you today, I think it's a telling reflection of our moment that it takes comedians to do real journalism. So thanks for your work.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that, man. And yeah, thanks so much for illuminating us on all these issues. I love talking to you. I could talk to you all day about these things. And I know it's a common interest that we both share. So I hope to have you back on again soon. And in the meantime, best of luck with everything, man. I'm rooting for you.
Thanks, brother. Peace.
Cheers, buddy. Peace. Shahid Butar. Man, that guy, he's so good on those issues. He's so well spoken on it too. Like, he used to work with the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, so he has a very extensive background in those issues, and he speaks upon them just so succinctly and so well. All right, let's see. Farkas, what's up, buddy? How are you? I got $50 lobster macaroni and cheese in Hawaii. It was okay. Man, I bet you I can make you a $50 lobster mac and cheese. That would be less than $50. I don't know if it'd be as good, though. Farkas, that's a lot for mac and cheese, even with lobster. And I love lobster. Don't get me wrong, but that in Massachusetts and in other New England coastal places, they actually have a law in place that you cannot feed the crew lobster so many times. Like you can only do it so many times, because otherwise they're like, we're not eating lobster again. Because it'd be easy to just be like, eat some of this lobster. And they have a law where it's like, you got to mix it up. You got to mix up the meals. So, it's all about perception. To some, it's a delicacy. To others, it's like, not again, dude. Not a frickin' again. But I hear you. Knowledge share. Thank you very much for the Super Chat contribution. I appreciate that very much. Mr. Broken Oz, please ask Shahid for a detailed debunking of Russiagate, as well as asking him about his support of Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and Jeremy Hammond. Didn't get to those topics this time around, but I will get to them next time. Thank you for your thoughts. All right. Farkas, Mr. Broken Oz, Knowledge Share, thank you very much for your thoughts. I appreciate it very much. If you are so able and willing, patreon.com/Ron Placome for a Give What You Can level. You get all kinds of exclusive content, including my album, including all kinds of stuff, including all kinds of videos, podcasts, stuff that's not available anywhere else. And it's for a Give What You Can level. If you are on stable ground financially and are interested, please consider it. patreon.com/Ron Placone. You help me keep this show on the air, help me expand this show. There's a lot of projects I'm not able to get to quite right now, like the documentaries about municipal broadband. I can't really get to that now because of the pandemic, but I really want to get everything in place to really hit that hard once this is all over. So patreon.com/Ron Placone if you are able and interested. And also, we got another e-show, Graham Out and myself. We got another e-show coming up this Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. That's when they're always going to be. And you can grab those tickets at ronplacone.com. We do a show via Zoom, and it's a good time. The last one sold out, which was exciting because Zoom has a person limit. So the last one sold out. It was real exciting. So grab your tickets in advance, ronplacone.com. Grab them. And in the meantime, I'll be back tomorrow, actually. And we'll be streaming a bunch. We typically do Monday through Thursday, but I've just been randomly streaming a bunch. So I'll be doing the patron stream tomorrow where I respond directly to the patrons. I also do a private Zoom show for the patrons once a week as well, by the way. And in the meantime, you know the drill. Lucy says meow. I say peace. Shahidforchange.us. Check them out. Lucy says meow. I say peace. Peace.